So, what you're trying to say is that you fell here from another world?
If someone told me a few years ago that we'd be seeing a mobile gacha game go multi-platform and end up being one of the most popular games in years, even finding their way into a Game of the Year list, I'd have never believed them. Mobile games are mobile games, I'd probably say. There's just no way you're going to convince the console and PC market to adopt what they feel amounts to cheap garbage. Thankfully, nobody actually told me that, and as such, I didn't get the chance to open my big mouth and look so foolish because, wouldn't you know it, here we are, and here is Genshin Impact. Let's just get this out of the way right off the top, shall we? Genshin Impact is not a Breath of the Wild clone. At least, no more than Breath of the Wild is a clone to Shadow of the Colossus because it features metered stamina for actions like climbing, or no more than it resembles one of dozens of games featuring cel-shaded anime-inspired visuals. While it is readily apparent that Genshin was heavily inspired by several aspects of Breath of the Wild, and really, why wouldn't it be? Breath of the Wild was a pretty popular game. You'll find out quickly after having played it for a short time that the comparisons don't run as deep as it may seem. With that out of the way, let's get to exploring perhaps why Genshin Impact is just so damn popular, and if it's worthy of all that praise. What is Genshin Impact? Why is Genshin Impact? When is Genshin Impact? These are all questions that beg to be answered, and I will answer exactly one of them. Genshin Impact is as much of a gamble as the gacha that it holds within. MiHoYo had success with their games in the past, and had a foundation to build off of with Honkai Impact 3rd. Yes, not the third, just third. Some absolute mad lad or mad lass decided that the next big move would be to spend $100 million to bring to market a gacha game wrapped in a full-blown action-adventure live service game shell on not just mobile, but consoles and PC as well. This isn't really something anyone had thought to do, or at the very least has had the courage to try and pull off, but MiHoYo was up for a challenge and went ahead with it anyway. Needless to say, regardless of anyone's opinion on it, it was a 500 IQ move. You start off by being treated to a particularly nice-looking cutscene that sets up the story and has you select one of two siblings to be your main character in the process. As it turns out, these siblings are twins that freely travel amongst the stars and visit different worlds at will, though for what purpose, we don't quite know. Arriving in Teyvat, they are unceremoniously separated by a particularly sassy lady who you might assume to be some sort of god. Whichever sibling you choose becomes your character, and the other is sealed away by said sassy lady before banishing you to the realm below. Along the way, your character, known as the Traveler, bumps into Paimon, a floating pixie-like character who mostly serves as a guide or emergency food, and the decision is made to make your way to Mondstadt to begin searching for your twin.
Hey, that's even worse than being a mascot!
The general story of Genshin Impact is one of the more surprisingly competent and enjoyable things the game has to offer. It's certainly not what you might expect from a gacha game, but that's not the only thing that might surprise you in that regard. Nevertheless, you'll spend the first 20 to 40 hours completing the main questline before you get to stretch your legs a bit into the mid to late game, and so having a story full of interesting characters and pleasing plot points goes a long way. Is it a meticulous, thought-provoking, and intricately woven tapestry of themes and personalities? No, not quite, but it is well written, and oftentimes endearing in the sort of way you'd perhaps find a B-movie script. A lot of your enjoyment, however, will likely come from how much you like the characters, and so if anime tropes aren't generally your thing in the first place, you might find it more difficult to appreciate. Ultimately, the story is merely a vehicle that gets you to the endgame grind, where most of your time will be spent, and most of your money too, if you feel MiHoYo has earned your dollars and cents. As you take on your first quests to begin your adventure in searching out your twin, it'll be time to get acquainted with the combat system. Genshin Impact's combat is a bit deceptive. On one hand, the actual combat itself is quite simplistic in the way that it's mostly a game of hack and slash rock paper scissors amongst various elements. On the other hand, the itemization and party member composition that's behind that simple combat can be substantially intricate. There's a lot going on here, both in terms of combat and character management, so I'll do my best to make sense of it for you. It's hard to review Genshin without it sounding almost like a game guide, so forgive me if it gets to sounding a bit like one. You'll be able to control 4 characters at any given time, with some exceptions, and will actively be switching between them depending on your combat needs. Genshin Impact has 7 elements in total, which are Pyro, Geo, Dendro, which is essentially nature, Cryo, Electro, and Animo, which is wind. Every character, save the Traveler, who can freely switch between a couple, wields one of these elements and uses a certain weapon type. The weapons are currently swords, claymores, bows, polearms, and catalysts. Each element interacts uniquely with each other element, and these interactions make up for a large portion of what will determine how much damage you're going to be handing out. Furthermore, depending on the composition of your team, you will receive bonuses in combat, like increased attack percentage for having 2 pyro characters in your group. Add to that the fact that many enemies also wield a particular element, and you've got an idea of as to how the basics might play out. The next layer in this anime action cake is the characters themselves, and what you can do to strengthen them.
When it comes to wet enemies, I've got them covered.
Each character is capable of being leveled up, and with each level you'll gain an increase in some of your base stats. At certain junctions, you'll have to ascend your character before they can be leveled further, which also inevitably leads to unlocking other abilities beyond just gaining those stats. Certain skills for each character can also be leveled, and for each copy of a character you obtain, you'll unlock another constellation, which boosts your character's power further in various ways. As useful as leveling is, however, a significant portion of your combat effectiveness comes from each character's weapon and artifacts. Artifacts are items in which there are 5 types that each focus on a specific part of your character's stats. Flowers boost your HP, and feathers boost your raw attack, for example. Beyond that, the artifacts have substats that also boost your character's strength. The better the artifact and the higher the level, the more opportunity for bigger and better stats the item has. Yes, even the artifacts and weapons are leveled individually. What's more, for anything other than the flowers and feathers, every artifact's main stat and substats are random. That doesn't really matter in the early game and even the mid game very much, but we'll get to why that matters in the end game shortly. All of this comes together to produce, well, it mostly produces a min-max glass cannon machine. As mentioned, the actual combat itself isn't particularly intricate, and certainly isn't nuanced. There's no real dodging mechanic in place, shields are more of a suggestion than a utility most of the time, and healing is more of a nuclear option than a staple of any given group. Genshin currently rewards big damage numbers, and so that's what you'll be spending a lot of your time trying to attain. Look no further than the 5-alarm fire that was the Zhongli release to understand just how serious the player base in China takes their big numbers, if you need an example. You might be wondering then, where all these weapons, artifacts, and characters come from, and that, my friends, is how they gotcha. I'm not sorry. While artifacts are obtained in-game primarily via domain grinding once you're past the early game chest opening around the world map, weapons and characters are a bit different. Weapons can be obtained via quests, crafting, or battle pass, which we have yet to discuss. Characters, however, are obtained all but exclusively via the wish system, which is a really cutesy name for their gacha mechanic. So then, let's talk about Genshin Impact's gacha system, shall we? This is where Genshin Impact enters the land of mobile games and where it often loses a lot of people. While many console and PC gamers would be begrudgingly acquainted with similar systems like loot boxes, mobile gacha is in its own world of manipulation. Gacha games are often just simply engines for driving money into the gacha system itself, and while Genshin Impact is no different in that regard, it is at least far more doable as a free-to-play player than most in the category. The wish system consists of banners that are either available for a limited time or are on a rotation of some sort. Each banner has a boosted set of characters or weapons for that limited time, increasing your odds, however slim, of getting one of them. You'll be able to use wishes obtained either by completing certain tasks in-game or by spending Primo Gems. Primo Gems are one of Genshin's currencies, and yes, it has more than one, and can also be obtained for free by completing certain in-game tasks. If you want more than that, however, you'll have to pay up with real money to fund your waifu and/or husbando hunt. You can also buy wishes in the shop's exchange pages using either Stardust or Star Glitter, both of which allow you to also purchase other items, should you prefer. Just to muddy the waters a bit more, there are two types of wishes: Acquaint Fate and Intertwined Fate. The Acquaint Fates are used for the standard banner that's always available, while the Intertwined Fates are used for the event-specific banners. A free-to-play player can expect to get roughly 200 wishes from really maxing out the story quests and other one-offs like the relatively extensive achievements book. You can also expect to get 30 or so wishes per month by doing daily activities, with this number sometimes being a bit higher depending on events, for example. This honestly isn't completely awful, and unless you're remarkably unlucky, it means that you'll likely have somewhere between 2 to 4 5-star characters by the time you've reached the endgame grind. Yes, that's right. Just like the weapons and artifacts, characters have star ratings as well that supposedly determine their level of awesome. Characters, however, are only ever 4 or 5 stars. While the odds at getting a 5-star character or weapon are slim, some 0.6% chance, there is an aptly named pity system in place to give you a hand if you're not prone to winning the lottery. Every 10 wishes in a given banner will net you at least one guaranteed 4-star weapon or character. At 90 or so wishes, your odds of a 5-star character are all but guaranteed, but again, it could be either a weapon or character. If you roll a 5-star character or weapon on an event banner, and it isn't the featured weapon or character, your next 5-star will be that featured weapon or character. Keeping up? I know my brain's mush, and I'm the one writing this crap. But what does it all mean? How much do 5-star items and characters really matter? How angry should we be at MiHoYo every time we get a terrible roll on the banners? Well, in all honesty, it's all pretty much workable regardless of what you get. If there's a positive spot in all of this gacha mayhem, it's that at the end of the day, knowledge of how to abuse the element system and getting your hands on a few good artifacts is more important than securing a 5-star damage-dealing monster. That doesn't account for those who want a character just based on liking them, of course, but if you're worried about not being able to do endgame stuff without wailing for every top-end character, fear not. So, what of that endgame and all those artifacts then? I'm glad you possibly asked. After you've experienced all Genshin has to offer in terms of story content and you're waiting for the next wave to hit, you're left with a daily grind of the end game. Currently, that consists of completing your daily requests, completing tasks to further your battle pass, and spending your resin. The battle pass is what you'd expect if you've ever interacted with one before. Unlocking levels of the pass provide items for free, and if you pony up some real-world dollars, you can get the other more significant portion of the rewards with the ability to acquire a battle pass exclusive weapon at level 30. Resin is the game's energy system and caps how much of certain tasks you can do in a day. It's also arguably Genshin's biggest point of criticism, so we'll talk about that more in depth. Genshin Impact's endgame puts its players between a rock and a hard place. Nearly everything you need to improve your character, whether that be artifacts, ascension materials, experience books for leveling, etc., all require you to use resin, but heavily constrain how much you have and can store. Beating a weekly boss will cost you 60 resin. Beating a world boss will cost you 40. Doing some runs for artifacts or ascension materials in domains will cost you 20, as well as ley lines for experience books and Mora, which is the game's currency used to level, anything. With only 160 resin per roughly 24-hour period, you can see how one would run out of resin quickly. This makes grinding for artifacts and other materials, all of which have randomized drops and randomized stats, an arduous process to say the least. To complicate things further, certain items can only be obtained in domains on certain days of the week. You do receive the occasional fragile resin item which restores 60 resin per, but they're few and far between. Even if you were crazy enough to spend real money to buy resin refills, they cap you there daily too. You can see how this would get frustrating quite quickly. You see, Genshin Impact, like basically every other gacha game, wants you to not necessarily play the game for huge swaths of time, or even on your own time, but more importantly, log in and interact with the game on a daily basis. They want you to have a relationship with the game, and it could be described as having another job, and then if you don't show up daily, you are punished for it. Resin? It doesn't carry over. You can lock away 120 of it in condensed resin you can craft, but that's it, as you can only hold 3 of these at a time. Miss your day to collect materials to ascend that weapon? Tough luck. Can't log in to do your daily requests to earn your Primo Gems? Unfortunate. What can be more frustrating is that despite all of this, if there isn't an event going on at the time to help you extend your play, You can literally be done your MiHoYo-approved Genshin time in 45 minutes or less. Daily requests might take you 5 minutes to complete, Battle Pass another 15 to 30 minutes depending on what you need or can do that day, and spending your resin another 5 to 10 minutes. If you're done the Battle Pass, which is easy to do thanks to how long it runs, your total playtime can be 20 minutes or less. Want to play more than that? Well, your options are limited. Short of having a secondary account or more, you're just walking around the map collecting items and killing enemies as they become available. Collect some rocks. Collect some flowers. Collect some crystal flies. Collect some fish. Collect some eggs. Kill Timmy's pigeons for the 1000th time to assert dominance. Done with that? How about killing some whopper flowers or ruin guards? Or maybe crack open the adventure book and go on a killing spree. You get the idea. If you're used to having this kind of relationship with a game because you've come from a mobile background, this might not bother you so much. If you're someone who likes to really grind a game or play it for long sessions in a meaningful way, Genshin's endgame might frustrate or even bore you. Once you do find yourself dungeon diving, it can get lonely out there, and maybe you want to have some company. The good news is that there is definitely co-op available to be had here. The bad news, unfortunately, is that, well, the implementation isn't particularly great. While you can roam around the map together with up to 3 other people, there isn't really anything to do other than take out whatever enemies get in your way. Loot is not shared, and while the others can pick up stuff like flowers, that's about it. Beyond that, you're doing the aforementioned dungeon diving, and all but one of the weekly bosses so far. As loot is based on spending your own resin, everyone is rewarded for completing the event, so no worries in that regard. You can add friends via your UID number, and from there they can join your world or vice versa as long as the joining player's world level, which is the level determined by how deep you are into the game more or less, is the same or higher. If you're fresh out of friends or they're currently on back order, you can always join queues to play with other random players as well. This is useful, of course, but is way too intrusive, as it isn't only applicable to domains and boss runs. As it stands, a player can simply send you an invite at any time, even if they aren't your friend, and even if you're not queuing for a domain. You can turn this off, but it also turns off requests from friends. Hopefully, MiHoYo will enter the future at some point, and allow you to set it for friends-only requests, but until then, you'll have to live with the occasional person poking at you to let them in. Co-op is where I feel Genshin Impact has the most room for improvement. Domains and bosses mostly consist of walking into a room and clearing it of enemies. There are no puzzles, no evolving layouts, etc. Genshin has one of the most beautifully put together overworlds of any game I've played in years, and yet, once you've completed the story, it's all but wasted entirely, especially in co-op. As of this writing, you still can't craft or use shops while in co-op, and so it's a really funneled experience. There are parts of events that are also often co-op, but how involved that is varies, and it's rarely more than what you're getting elsewhere. Don't get me wrong, joining in with some friends to wipe a domain out in under 30 seconds can be fun, but it could also be so much more substantial. Adjust the loot drop quality for time spent, and I don't think anyone would mind having some more lengthy variety. Even having chests of various qualities spawn around the world map at random and on a refresh timer with enemies protecting them based on co-op level would at least give players some reason to explore the world together. That is, of course, if everyone shared in the loot. I'd love to see Genshin take on a similar style to the original Guild Wars. Have towns be instanced where X number of players can see each other and maybe team up if they want to. Have it be a way to show off what I'm sure will be inevitable costumes and emotes for characters. Once you leave the town, have it be instanced to your team only, and away you go. As it stands, co-op feels like a haphazardly tacked on feature that adds value, but not very much of it. Events have been mentioned several times now, so let's go over that as well. Events in Genshin vary wildly in size and complexity, but all of them serve to aid in giving those in the endgame more to do and more to enjoy outside of their daily grind. Some of these events are as simple as delivering food items to NPCs in a certain amount of time, while others are far more involved, such as the recent tower defense minigame in the last event. Events tend to offer your best opportunity to collect extra primo gems, experience books, mora, and more, so it's nice that they tend to happen so frequently. Beyond the events, MiHoYo has kept an impressive pace in regards to content releases that includes not only characters, but entire new map areas filled with quests and new things to do. Story-specific quests also get slotted into the release schedule, and so far as bothersome as some of the endgame can be, it's usually not too long before you're given something new to cut your teeth on. In fact, as I'm writing this, Genshin is entering into version 1.4, which stands to be the foundation for such updates in the near future. If you've been watching the video review, well, by now you probably know, but for everyone else out there, I'll say it. Genshin Impact is a better-looking game than it has any right to be. You wouldn't expect a mobile game built in Unity that's supposed to run on phones, PCs, and the PlayStation to look as good as Genshin does. Characters are remarkably unique and well-designed, albeit with a heavy dose of fan service occasionally. The overworld, however, is the real gem here. As I mentioned previously, it's one of, if not the most well-designed overworlds I've played in a very long time. Often, you can tell when a large swath of a map is procedurally generated to some degree, but Genshin doesn't come across that way at all. In fact, it feels like the entire map has been done by hand, and a lot of the views that you can find at various points throughout the day or night highlight just that. Animations are well done, as are the effects, even if they do end up making it hard to know what's going on sometimes, and there are little details to be appreciated everywhere. Accompanying the great visuals is an equally great soundtrack that admittedly is heavily derivative of tracks you've probably heard before in other popular games. Characters are all voiced wonderfully, though that doesn't mean you're gonna love all of their never-ending monologuing or their personalities. They have a substantial amount of voiceover here, and miHoYo really puts a spotlight on the actors, which is wonderful to see. Sadly, performance in Genshin Impact isn't particularly uniform. If you're on a PC, you're going to experience the best the game has to offer despite the 60 FPS cap. My Note 9 runs the game at 720p respectively at what would be around 30 FPS, but unfortunately, the PS4, and even the Pro model, suffers terribly. Loading times on the PS4 Pro are abysmal, and my girlfriend often gets left behind by co-op teams in dungeons and even events because it takes so long for her to join. The frame rate is also horrendous, and for reasons I can't quite fathom. Most heavy combat will see you experiencing maybe 12 to 15 FPS if you're lucky, and honestly, I don't think there's any good excuse for it. I can't personally speak for the PS5 version of the game at this time, but reports are that it mostly hits its 60 FPS mark at 4K and boots the game upwards of 50 seconds faster than the PS4. The performance variance can dramatically affect your ability to control your team effectively, so if you can, I would recommend playing it on the PC or PS5. There are probably some animals out there capable of late-game dungeon running with a cell phone, but this old Canadian is definitely not one of them. One other thing to keep in mind about Genshin, should you choose to hop in, is that depending on where you create your account, it will limit where else you can take your account to play. For example, PC and mobile are interchangeable, and so I can play on my phone or on my PC with the same account. My girlfriend, on the other hand, is stuck on the PlayStation, because they do not allow it to be moved anywhere else. This is incredibly annoying and smacks of PlayStation, but I don't know exactly who made that judgment call, so I can't point fingers directly. Also, as of this writing, there's not much info about release dates for an Xbox version or a Switch version, so you'll have to keep a lookout for that. It's obvious that this formula is something that a lot of people can get behind. Having pulled in some $800 million since launch, not including the PC and PS4 revenue, Genshin Impact is making a major impression that will certainly catch the eye of more than a few publishers and developers. While the incentive there is to spend, it's not as pushy as most gacha titles and has a very healthy free-to-play community. I personally spend about 20 Canadian pesos a month as of late, and this serves me fine for the amount of time that I put in. Even if you were to play only the main story content, you're looking at some 40 hours of game to play through and can easily do so without spending a cent. For those who stick around for the endgame, while content is thin and the resin system restrictive, events and an aggressive development cycle have kept most of the dedicated players satisfied, for now. While co-op is limited and the world itself underutilized, it's hard to argue Genshin's value should you be a fan of action-adventure. Genshin Impact is an impressive blend of mobile and standard gaming fare that is sure to please not just those interested in collecting waifus and husbandos, though it might convert you along the way. Hey everyone, Thanks for watching. If you've enjoyed the video, make sure you give the video a like, subscribe to our channel, and hit the bell icon so you're notified when new content arrives. Want to support Critical Hit more directly? Visit our Patreon link in the description below to do just that. It helps keep us as ad-free as we can be here on YouTube and on our website. Thanks again, and see you on the next one.